Welcome back to WECAN, where role models inspire by telling their stories, their insights and experiences to guide others. And I'm very excited to talk to Joe Seddon today. Joe, welcome to WECAN. You are an award-winning social entrepreneur. You're the CEO and founder of Zero Gravity, the first tech startup in the world that is developing technology to identify top talent from low-income areas, incubated so talented people everywhere can reach their full potential. You unlock opportunity with your free services for students to get into uni, work, and into life with mentoring, masterclasses, scholarships, and a thriving community. You managed to really grow into a thriving, high-performing nationwide community in the UK, which is super impressive. I believe you invested £200 and grew this into a mission-driven tech company that is scaling ambitions across the UK. Joe, I think you facilitated 20,000 offers to top universities throughout the country since 2021, which is a very impressive number. And you can join listeners as members, so as students, or as mentors for more social mobility. Joe, tell us some more about Zero Gravity and how your platform works.
You make it sound so simple, but the startup journey is anything but. So I started Zero Gravity back in 2018, like you said, originally from my childhood bedroom in West Yorkshire. I started it in many ways to try and help future versions of myself. Now, I grew up in a low-income town in the UK called Morley, a single-parent background. I saw firsthand just how difficult it was for students like me to break into top universities and careers. And I was one of the lucky ones. I managed to win a place to study at Oxford University, which was a crazy, life transforming experience. But in the year that I graduated from Oxford, not a single person from the parliamentary constituency that I grew up in won a place. And there's around 100,000 people who live in each of these parliamentary constituencies, and not a single person from where I grew up won a place. So it just kind of identified for me that kind of chasm of opportunity that we've got in this country. So when I graduated from university, I set out to do something about it. And I didn't have any resources. Like you said, I only had 200 quid left from my student loan. But what I did have was a kind of burning passion to solve this problem, and also a laptop. I sort of got going from my bedroom, trying to build a tech startup in many ways from the ground up. And that's what's got me here today.
Joe, so tell us a bit more about your background. You come from Yorkshire. You must have been really good in school. You got into Oxford. Tell us a little bit how the pivotal points that took you to where you are today, so that listeners can really follow your journey and see the points that got you to where you are today.
So, like I said, I grew up in a single parent family, and that was sort of one of the most defining aspects of my life, because even though it was really difficult to talk about at the time, in many ways, kind of growing up, I suppose, in a more vulnerable situation where you don't necessarily have a kind of steady father figure to rely on, does shape your mentality as a young person. And
Mm.
in some ways, even though it made me feel vulnerable, it sort of created a burning desire within me to try and defy the odds and almost take control over my life and to find a way to feel a sense of agency that I didn't always feel in my younger years. So that was something that sort of very much shaped my mindset. And it's interesting reflecting on my own experience. But when you look at the data, an actual disproportionate amount of entrepreneurs come from single parent families. And I think that
Mm.
often is this kind of perverse side of trauma, which is if you've had adverse situations growing up, it does often sort of build you into that more kind of gritty, resilient, sort of high agency person.
Yeah.
So that was a defining moment in my life. I think the second thing was actually more arbitrary, which is, no, I was always academic. I always did well at school. But when I got my GCSE results, all the way back in 2013, when I was 16 years old, my school actually put me up for a live radio interview on BBC Radio Leeds, which is a sort of radio channel with maybe 100,000 listeners at any one point maximum. And I opened my results live on radio, and I got a good set of results, thankfully, so I wasn't crying live on there. But the interviewer asked me, he said, Joe, this is a great set of results. Are you going to think about giving Oxford or Cambridge a go now? And how do you feel about that as a kind of state school student from Yorkshire? And I was just completely flummoxed. I didn't know what to say, because the idea of going to a kind of elite institution like that had just never crossed my mind before. It was a completely alien ambition, but it did kind of sow the seed of something, which it made me think afterwards, maybe I could be the sort of person who defies the odds and goes somewhere like that. Maybe I should look into giving it a go. So in many ways, that completely kind of arbitrary circumstance was the thing that sort of pushed me in that direction and led me to get into a university, which was just the sort of place that most people in West Yorkshire never even dream of attending, let alone studying there for kind of 3 years and getting a degree.
Joe, so what was your experience like at Oxford?
Well, it was kind of a life-changing experience. I knew that at the time. I knew I was sort of stepping into something that was going to be a kind of defining factor in my life. What I didn't necessarily anticipate was how big the kind of shift in culture and identity was going to be, and also how kind of financially challenging university could be as well. Now, just starting with the latter. Now, I went to university back in the day where you got a maintenance grant from the government alongside your student loan. But even that wasn't enough to cover my core costs, like the cost of rent, the cost of food. And I was lucky that the university actually gave me a kind of sizable kind of bursary because of the kind of background I was from. And without that, I just wouldn't have been able to survive at university. So in some ways that makes me feel very grateful. But on the flip side, I know that university can be sort of financially impossible for a lot of low income students. Indeed, it's often assumed in the UK that if you go to university, you're either going to get financial support from the bank of mum and dad, or you're going to work sort of 20 hours a week part time to keep yourself afloat. And that was a big wake up call for me and made me realize just how kind of unequal the system is if you are someone from a kind of lower income background. But the other thing was also like the culture and identity shift. I knew that going to Oxford was always going to be a big change in terms of kind of workload and expectation. What I didn't realize is how much I was going to have to kind of detach myself from the kind of identity that I formed growing up in order to adapt in this very new environment. Now, I was suddenly going to university surrounded by people from very different backgrounds from my own. And they're not just different countries, but also completely different educational backgrounds as well. And in many ways, I had to kind of change who I was in order to fit in, kind of diluting your accent, changing the way that you talk, taking up new interests. And in many ways, this is a natural part of people kind of socializing into different communities. But it sort of created this kind of existential questions of identity for me, where I wanted to kind of stay rooted in the identity I formed growing up, but also be able to fit in where I was going. So I was sort of getting pulled in two different directions. I remember finding that quite difficult when I was sort of 18, 19, 20 years old, in terms of how do I stay true to who I am whilst making sure I'm the right person for where I'm going.
Joe, and how did you marry that dichotomy that you sort of found yourself in? Were you able to stay authentic to where you came from, while also, stepping into that ring of people from everywhere, and often many people from very privileged backgrounds?
I think the first thing is kind of acceptance, which is it's going to feel really tricky at the time to navigate these issues, because in many ways you're going to feel the imposter syndrome of not fully fitting in where you're going, but also like the social mobility guilt of being slowly kind of dislocated from where you came from. So the first thing is acceptance that it feels difficult and anxiety inducing and confusing, because it is.
Yeah.
And in terms of how you stay authentic to your true self whilst adapting, I think one kind of framework for thinking about these questions of identity is sort of separating your kind of values from your kind of beliefs and interests. I think the
Mm,
thing that keeps people feeling authentic is being able to kind of retain your core values growing up. And that is kind of eventually what I worked out, which is, the values I was taught growing up in Yorkshire, which was, be straight talking, don't complain, be gritty and willing to get your hands dirty, and
yeah.
take action, don't just talk. But those sort of very northern values were things that I realised actually I want to retain these over time. These are the things that are kind of inherently me and who I am. But my kind of beliefs and interests were the things that I was able to morph. Now, I developed interests by the age of 21 that I just didn't have when I was 18 years old. And that's completely inevitable when you step into a new walk of life. And also, your beliefs should change as well. If you have completely fixed beliefs that are unchanging over time, I'd suggest that you don't have a strong enough curiosity about the world that you're living in. So my values stayed rooted, but my beliefs and interests morphed over time as I suddenly became exposed to ideas and environments I'd never been in before. And eventually I became comfortable with that new setup, which is staying true to core values, but allowing that other stuff to change over time.
Joe, I'm really thankful that you explained it so well because I think a lot of young people I speak to, they find themselves in the same situation. So it's really important that, people lead by example, and that's what you're doing with everything that you do. So tell us a little bit the big vision for zero gravity. You've come super far. What does success look like for you?
But we kind of have this thesis that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And
Yeah.
we want to be the business that changes that. And the way we're going to achieve that is essentially by completely changing the game in terms of what talented students from low opportunity backgrounds can achieve. So
Mm,
we've essentially built a platform that identifies these students when they're still at school and gives them the kind of resources through our mobile app to break into these top universities and careers. And we're
mm,
not just doing that to kind of level the playing field and create a kind of fairer system, but what we're doing it because we genuinely believe there's so much unrecognized talent out there in the UK, which is currently going to waste.
yeah.
And that's not just bad for the people involved, that's also bad for the kind of employers and universities who are missing the kind of next generation of thought leaders and doers who are going to make the world a more dynamic and interesting place to live in. So, like, that's what we've been doing for the past 7 years now. And what started off as a small platform in 2018 that was only helping around 100 students per year has now grown into something that's helping 13,000 school students every year
Mm,
break into these top universities. And like you said at the beginning, when you sort of start to accumulate that we've now got tens of thousands of students into these leading institutions. They're not just top universities, but also apprenticeships and graduate jobs as well. And that's really exciting because not only is that kind of change in action, but it's also kind of having this organic effect of starting to reshape the kind of institutions and communities that we're affecting in terms of what's possible. A lot of the employers we work with now genuinely believe it's possible to recruit working class talent and for that to be something that kind of powers their company rather than something which is a kind of risk not worth taking. Like the same with like schools and local areas as well. Like once you get one person from a school into a top university, it suddenly opens the kind of floodgates for everyone else because suddenly going to a place like that feels like something that's possible, that's in reach. So that's the most exciting thing about what we're doing. That when you get to these high levels of scale, you get
yeah.
this kind of culture transforming effect, which doesn't even have to be kind of deliberate or conscious or direct. It happens indirectly through the impacts that you're creating through every single person that you help. And that's what's so exciting about running a business like this.
Joe, it's so exciting. And of course, never to be forgotten that those people will also work towards an economy that is stronger because it is more diverse, we include more people, and we push more people into the jobs that generate more dollars. Joe, so I'm wondering, how do you lead? If someone asked you, what kind of a leader are you? How would you describe it?
Well, I started Zero Gravity when I was 21 years old, and I hired my very first employee when I was 22 years old. So I'm a bit older now, I'm 28, but my journey in terms of growing this business has always been as a kind of young first-time founder. And I was also an introvert. I was not someone who was necessarily naturally interested in leadership or management. I was far more comfortable in the realm of kind of ideas and product and execution than working out how to get results through others. And that's had to be something that I've learned over time. But when it comes to leadership, I think as a kind of younger founder, like you cannot rely on kind of traditional or hierarchical forms of leadership. If you're a 22-year-old trying to grow a company, no one's going to respect you because of the nature of who you are. Like you don't have any credibility or track record. And no one's also going to respect you through hierarchy as well. If you're running a small business, like you don't have hierarchy, like you
Mm.
probably know like one of a team of 5 or 6 people. So no one's just going to respect you because you have the label founder or CEO. The only way you can kind of get people to come with you on the journey and buy into what you're doing and sort of create that culture of high expectations is for a more kind of charismatic form of authority where you kind of try and lead people somewhere due to a kind of shared form of purpose and mission and use that as the guiding force to galvanize people. And
Mm.
that's always what I've kind of led into, trying to really clearly articulate the why zero gravity's mission matters. Why is this the sort of thing that should get you out of bed in the morning? And what are the kind of stepping stones to get there? Like, what are the milestones we can achieve over the next 3 months, 6 months, and a year to take us towards that grand vision? And if you can do that, and if you can constantly communicate it, reinforce it, storytell about it, not just to the world, but your team as well, you can sort of capture that energy and mission that can convince people to go on the journey of a young founder who's never had a proper job before. And that is always the form of kind of leadership I've tried to exhibit, because in many ways I didn't have any alternative other than that. That's what I had to do. So that's what I've done from day one, really.
Yeah, you grew on the job. Joe, you've raised an enormous amount of money. How did you do that?
Yeah, so we've raised £6.5 million of equity funding
Mm.
since I started the organisation. So we've come a long way since I started with the final 200 quid of my student loan.
Yeah.
I think the way I managed to do it was by essentially convincing people that this problem that we were tackling was not just a social problem, but also an economic one
Yeah.
as well. Now, when you talk about issues around breaking the link between background and opportunity or leveling the playing field, people naturally see it as a kind of issue of social justice or philanthropy. People should care about it because it's the right thing to do. But I also think it's a massive economic problem as well. Now,
Absolutely.
when you look at employers and universities, they suffer if they don't find the best talent. And increasingly, they're also being regulated and held to account by their clients, the markets, their own employees on getting this issue solved. So I always saw this as an economic problem. So when I was pitching to investors, I was essentially able to tell them, your money will not only help grow this incredible social impact machine, but there's also a viable path here if we get things right to also deliver a fantastic return for you as a thank you for doing that. Because by getting these top students from low opportunity areas into top universities and careers, we can not only change their lives, but also financially benefit the institutions they step into as well. So, in many ways, it was that kind of virtuous circle, that kind of what sometimes we call internally lockstep model, where the social impact and the economic benefits are kind of aligned, which allowed me to kind of do what people haven't been able to do before in this sector, which is raise equity funding in order to back a kind of socially impactful idea.
Yeah. Amazing. Joe, 7 years in, what are your challenges still to this day, and how do you reframe them?
I think that the biggest challenge of a business like Zero Gravity is it's essentially a marketplace style business where, on the one hand, we're B2C, that we have to attract students onto our platform and engage them and retain them and help them achieve their outcomes. But we're also B2B because we work with all of these top employers, universities, and schools who want to be benefited as institutions rather than individuals. So we're both B2C and B2B, which is the kind of trickiest combination to get right, because rather than just focusing on solving for one of those use cases, you've got to make the entire thing work in a marketplace. So that has, I think, been the biggest kind of structural challenge. And the way we've tried to solve it is by trying to find those kind of loops or virtuous circles, whatever you want to call them, where there's a kind of positive cycle behind creating value for individuals and then that creating value for institutions, or vice versa. So, like, to give you an obvious example of that, by supporting our members in terms of upskilling them when they get to university to make them stand out in a job application, that makes it much easier for an employer to say, yes, I want to hire this person, which then makes them more likely to hire more jobs through our platform, which then makes it more likely for students to want to actually put in the effort to get a job. So it creates that virtuous cycle or that positive feedback loop. And that's what we've been really focused on in business. How do we create those positive feedback loops between individual students and then the institutions that want to hire and admit them? But it's not always straightforward. When you're running a business like Zero Gravity, on one day you're doing things like enterprise sales, selling to massive corporations, and on the other part of the day you're kind of running meme or influencer campaigns to try and get 16-year-olds to sign up. So you're having to do all these different types of activities at once. And that can be a real kind of focus challenge of how do you make sure that all of these different things don't overwhelm you as a business and you're still able to deliver good results.
Joe, and what do you feel are you most proud of? If you think to date, if you think about the last, you know, your life really.
I think I'm proud that we've managed to scale the organisation up to support the number of students that we have done. But the main thing is I'm proud that we've managed to actually execute on my original vision, which was sometimes I summed it up as taking a student into uni, work, and life, which essentially just means rather than helping them on one part of their journey, sort of completely putting them on a different trajectory and not just helping them get into university, but also get their first job and then thrive in that first job as well. And seeing that come to life, where we've got hundreds of students now who've not only used us to get into their university of choice, but have also won a job through our platform with one of our partners, and seeing those students now they're succeeding, they're getting towards their mid-20s, just a completely transformed individual from when we first met them when they were 16 or 17 years old. Now, that is incredibly kind of motivating, because you just see how a platform like this can be transformational rather than just incremental. So seeing that into uni, work, and life vision come to life, I think is the thing that I'm proudest of.
Super rewarding and super inspiring, Joe. Yeah, definitely. Joe, I'm wondering if you can paint us a little bit of a picture of the background of the UK data where you sit in, where you are being a solution to an obvious problem where 26% of school students are eligible for school means that meals. That means they come from very low income households. I think that's at least 2.5 million children in the UK a year. They're 50, they're half as likely to get to university. Paint us a little bit the picture of the economic background of the UK, for which reason zero gravity is so important, because not only do you create opportunity and you scale ambition and you find top talent and you help the economy, but you also reduce the money we would have to otherwise put into those young people, right? So you're not only helping the economy in growing it, but you're also reducing costs. Tell us a bit that sort of bigger picture of why it's so important to run zero gravity.
I think one of the clearest ways to bring this to life is actually to think back historically about what society and the economy looked like in previous eras where there was very little social mobility. So if you think back 1,000 years to the medieval era, it was almost impossible to be socially mobile in that era. And if you were born a peasant, you died a peasant. If you were born an aristocrat, you died an aristocrat. And there was very little, if any, mobility
Yeah.
between socioeconomic classes. And indeed, socioeconomic classes were kind of enshrined, and not just kind of politically in terms of your rights, but also sometimes religiously as well. There was a sense that you were kind of predestined or predetermined to remain where you were, and that was part of the way society should function. Roll forward 1,000 years, clearly times have meaningfully changed. It is possible to be socially mobile now, that we all have friends or people we know who grew up in tricky backgrounds that have managed to ascend to very different points in life. But we're not doing as good a job as we could do. Looking at the UK, for instance, if you're from an affluent background, you're 6 times more likely to go to a top university than you are if you come from a low income background. So that is still a very, very dramatic difference in 2025 in the UK.
Yeah.
And when you look at also what people achieve economically over a lifetime, when you look at the data, you can predict around 45% of what someone will earn over their lifetime on average by what their parents earn. And like that is quite dramatic when you think about it. Almost like £1 out of every £2 that you earn can essentially be predicted on average based on what your parents earn growing up. And the UK does much worse on these measures than comparable countries. Now, when you look at Netherlands, Germany, the sort of Nordic countries, Denmark, they all perform significantly better on these metrics, where what your parents earned growing up predicts a far lower amount of what you can earn in your life. And that's essentially what we're trying to shift at Zero Gravity. We're trying to create a more mobile society where background no longer determines success. And clearly that's the right thing to do. Clearly that's the world that most people that sat behind a veil of ignorance, not knowing who they were and what background they're going to grow up in. That is the world that most people want.
Yeah.
But it's the world that doesn't currently exist, but could exist if we actually put more effort and innovation to getting this right. And the reason I know this is a world that can exist is if we told our medieval ancestors 1,000 years ago what the world is like today, they wouldn't even be able to fathom the amount of mobility in society. It would seem impossible. So how do we get the next 50 years, next 100 years right? So our kind of descendants in 100 years look back and think, wow, the world is so much more mobile than it was in 2025. And now this is just reality. That is the world we want to create. It's Zero Gravity.
Yeah, which is super inspiring, Joe. And thank you for painting that picture so vividly that we can really all envision that. Joe, what makes you feel powerful? What makes you feel powerful and strong?
I think it's that kind of gratification of seeing results based on the effort of your or the effort you put in or hard work. And that sounds like an obvious thing to say. But for so many young people in 2025, it almost seems like a dislocation between how much hard work and effort you put in and then the rewards that you get from the system. They look at how difficult it is to buy a house, or how unequal access to top jobs is, or how unequal access to university is. That kind of link between hard work and effort and reward has sort of become broken in 21st century Britain. And I personally think that everyone feels more powerful when they see that link vividly in their own life and the life of others. And that's what we've got to try and recapture as a country. Because if we don't do that, that's what leads to people becoming alienated and giving up and turning to kind of the extremes or just kind of nihilism. And that is not a world that anyone wants to live in. So creating that link between effort and reward sounds so basic, but that's the thing that we've lost in 21st century Britain, and we need to change that.
I couldn't agree more. So, what keeps you up at night?
I think as a startup founder, it's very rare if you ever get a perfect night's sleep because of the kind of like weight of the world on your shoulders, or that at least that's what it feels like a lot of the time. I think what keeps me up is essentially questions around like can we continue to grow and create impact for our members in an ever-changing world? Like
Mm,
2025 is such an exciting year in many ways for zero gravity because that AI has started to really kind of shift the landscape
mm,
in terms of what you can achieve when it comes to learning and also getting support to break into top opportunities. The flip side of that is AI is also reshaping a lot of the institutions that we work with. The employers are hiring less entry level people, universities are having their models completely challenged. So it's a both exciting and daunting time of how do we make sure that our product remains relevant and on the cutting edge in a world that is like literally constantly changing. That people have always used those sort of cliched phrases, but it does feel like we are at the very beginning of the next technological revolution. So getting the next kind of 5 to 10 years right in terms of what we build and the benefit it has for our members, in terms of being able to tackle this new world that we're stepping into, is the main key thing for our business. And that's the thing that keeps me up at night and making sure that we're getting that right. Because we can't just continue to do what we've done for the last 5 years for the next 5 years because the world is changing dramatically.
yeah, yeah, definitely. What are deal breakers for you, Joe?
I think it comes down to that like values alignment piece. You know, when it comes to like hiring, for instance, at Zero Gravity, we put a huge emphasis in our hiring process on mission and values alignment. And even if we find a fantastic candidate who has incredible skills and really relevant experience, if you don't have that values alignment, we make the really difficult decision to say, no, we're not moving forward with this. And the reason it's important is even though people sometimes pragmatically choose to be flexible on mission and values in the short term, it's always the wrong decision in the long term. Because if you want to do something like build a startup, you have to defy the odds. You have to go where no one else has been
Yeah,
before. And in order to do that, you have to be unified on something because it's the kind of sense of belonging and connection and unity that keeps you going when times get tough. And that's where if someone is not aligned on your fundamental mission and values, everything falls apart really quickly. So that is the thing that's non-negotiable for me. That any person I work with, I want to see that they kind of have that alignment on core values. Diversity on experience, diversity on thought, diversity of background, but core alignment on mission and values. That is so, so important for me.
yeah. Joe, so what are your plans and goals?
So for the final 3 months of this year, no, we're kind of working through the current university and graduate application cycle for
Yeah,
our members. No, we think when we confirm the dates for this year, like you mentioned, we'll have over 20,000 zero gravity members who will now have gotten into a top university in the UK, which is super super exciting. But we want to make sure that translates into fantastic career opportunities as well. So the thing that we're really focused on is how do we make sure every single zero gravity member that we get into a top university bags a place on an internship or graduate job with our partners. Now, if we can't achieve that, then we have not taken people on that full journey into uni, work, and life. So
yeah.
really taking that next step of the journey is what we're really, really focused on for the next 3 months of this year that we've got left.
Amazing, Joe. What takeaways would you have our listeners from your story, Joe?
I think the most obvious thing is it is possible to start a startup business which scales, I guess, tens of thousands of users, millions of pounds of revenue, and then millions of pounds of investment. That is something that would have seemed completely impossible and even in some ways unfathomable 7 years ago when I started. But I sit here today, having done it, being able to say it is possible, but it's definitely not easy. And the way that I think that you kind of are able to go on a journey like I've gone on is by focusing on a problem or mission that you are kind of personally invested in. There's something where you've got skin in the game and lived experience. And the reason that's a competitive advantage is in many ways you are your first user. You are building something for yourself, and you've got all of the kind of insight to know really get underneath what is it that actually causes pain when it comes to that problem, and what are the things that can actually solve it. So I would always encourage startup founders that I meet, rather than kind of like theorizing about the world and they're trying to come up with these crazy wacky ideas, just go back to basics, which is what is the problem that you have experienced in your life that has been more painful than anything else and that you know more about than all of your friends and family. And that is often the best place to start in terms of finding the kind of startup idea, which is not only going to animate you personally and get you out of bed in the morning, but is actually going to give you the best possible chance of success because you have the competitive advantage of insight and also the kind of long-term perseverance to put that insight into action. So start with yourself, and that's how you'll find the idea that you need to move forward.
Joe, I'm so impressed with you with Zero Gravity. I'm so grateful for the work you do every day. I'm so grateful for this incredible platform that gives so much opportunity and ambition to young people. I would like to encourage everyone listening here, whether you're a young student and you listen to Joe's story, where maybe you hear Oxford or Cambridge for the first time, this is a possibility for you. Get in touch with Zero Gravity. If you're a person who's listening who thinks I can be a mentor, I have what that is required, get in touch with Zero Gravity. If you're a corporation or company in the UK that would like to partner with Joe and Zero Gravity, please get in touch. And thank you for uniting effort and reward and for changing a system that is broken.